absolutely like water out of a fire hose out of Washington. Remember all those termite mounds I talked about? That's what they do. And that money is signed up for by the bureaucracy. And then when I was in the State House, we'd show up in January every year and discover all of a sudden had to come up with all this new money for all these programs I never signed up for. So I designed this law to do two things. One, save money. Over $600 billion a year flies out the door every year for federal grant programs that are approved by the bureaucracy. And then the states and local government, we're on the hook as taxpayers to pay for them. Now, the budget deficit right now is almost $1 trillion. The national debt is already at $12 trillion. The unfunded liabilities exceed the net worth of the nation. We got to start with fundamentals. Approach this like Dave Ramsey, who I really admire. I mean, you know, Dave Ramsey, it is true whether you're in business, your personal life, or the federal or the government, you focus on fundamentals. You retrench, get back to the basics of this document. Limited government, focus on what the federal government does best, and you start by the easy things right away. Zeroing out the czars is going to be a world of fun. And for example, the unspent TARP money, all that's going to go right back into the Treasury to pay down the debt. Not only the unspent spendulous money, the unspent spendulous money and the TARP money that the institution's been paying back. You use that right away. You're already up to about $4 to $5, maybe $600 billion right out of the gate of reducing the federal deficit. We passed this law that I just described to you. The state legislatures will have to, on a record vote, imagine they're going to have a hard time doing this. Record vote in front of all of us, God and the world, that yes, Texas accepts the federal money with all the strings attached, and we surrender control of the public schools, for example, to the federal government, and we'll let the federal government tell us how to run our schools to the extent that state law is not the same. They're not going to do it. I mean, they're going to be really hard for them to get away with it. So this will, may have taken a bite at a time the way I've written it, because I want to go, look, this is the only, just to lay it out there, all federal grant money to state and local government disappears 90 days after the next legislative session, unless they pass a law and say, yes, we want the money with all the strings attached. Ooh. Now, other than what they agreed to, total freedom, absolute state sovereignty under the 10th Amendment. If we didn't agree to it, we are free to run our schools without any interference of any kind from the federal government. And what we can do is we create standing. The only way I was able to beat Judge Justice is I literally had to create standing to go to court to sue him, because Dan Morales was such a weasel. I couldn't get Morales as our state attorney general to actually go to court and get rid of the judge's control. So as a state legislator, I had to figure out, how do I get around the fact that Texas is represented by the attorney general? Well, I had to figure out a way to make the judge rule. So you have to create standing. Another piece of this law that I've added since I really went through it with y'all, Catherine, is you have to create standing for state and locally elected officials to sue the federal government for the sole purpose of restoring autonomous state sovereignty as intended by our founding fathers. And what you've got then is the federal law, a state law, and a court order, all aim in the same direction. The restoration of state sovereignty and individual freedom as the founders intended. And you just pick your subject, and it works. Every one of the things that are the only, all of the rights, powers, and privileges that were reserved to we the people in the state, you can do this systematically. Public safety. I've already run this past Sheriff Adrian Garcia. Why aren't we making the Harris County Sheriff's Department the lead Homeland Security agency for the Port of Houston? Why aren't we making the Harris County Sheriff's Department, for example, the lead public safety Homeland Security agency for Harris County? And then each one of us as free citizens, starting, as Mr. Jefferson said, his idea was, the founder's idea was that we as free Americans would control everything that we could see and touch. My home, my family is my castle. The federal government, the government has no jurisdiction over me and my home, my mind, my family, my bank account, my gun case, my school, my synagogue, my church, etc. And by picking out areas like, for example, I'm going to target Homeland Security is a good one to start with, because I'm going to be, I may not be the chairman of that subcommittee right away, but I should be in line for that fairly soon. I don't know where I'll wind up as subcommittee chairman. It may be one of the law enforcement subcommittees, the Commerce, Justice, Science, or NASA subcommittee. They may put me on another one, I'm not sure. But the Homeland Security angle is a particularly good one, because it also allows us for Congress by law to reassert our individual freedom to protect my home, to protect my family, to protect my neighborhood, my community. And the sheriff, really, who's a locally elected, constitutionally vested officer, ought to be the lead agency. Think about every one of the major hijacking, the terrorist in Times Square, hot dog vendor. The people on United Flight 93 took back the airplane, average Americans. I'm running long here. Y'all just stop me with questions. It's 11 till. But Homeland Security and the grant programs, public education appear to me to be particularly fruitful, good examples. If you're going to, because the country has to, people have we've fallen so far from what the founders intended that what I thought C-SPAN's audience was reasonably well educated. People on C-SPAN thought that the federal government can do anything they want. Why, Culberson? You're a right-wing Neanderthal for even thinking the federal government's limited in what they can do. I was just speechless. It was just amazing. And so we have to pick out a couple of areas by focusing on being fiscally responsible and saving money, and then passing legislation like this designed to, and I'll use this as an example, there's a couple other things we can do as well, that will give us a couple of good case studies that will work, that people can see tangible results on. In the Homeland Security one in particular, we can save vast sums of money and shut down whole swaths of federal bureaucracies and turn those programs into block grant programs and send them straight down, for example, for the sheriff's office. One thing we probably really need to consider is allowing states, for example, another one that you could do, if a state bureaucrat identifies a federal program that's doing, a state or local bureaucrat, if they identify a state or local program that's doing the same thing as a federal program, then half the federal money to Texas, for example, in that area, has to go to pay down the deficit, can't go to any other state. The other 45% of the money goes to the state or local government as a block grant, and the bureaucrat, or any of us, get 5% as a finder's fee for the first year. Because we're going to have to really be creative about flushing out. The waste is, as you can imagine, absolutely unimaginable. And the way you solve it, if you apply core Republican principles, that not always unties itself. Just trust each one of us as individual Americans, locally elected officials, local government, county government, state government, our locally elected officials, and shift this balance back to the state and local level, and you really have unraveled the knot. The knot has untied itself. And let me close with this as a wonderful illustration, and we can dive into more detail and answer questions. That is and again, remember, we couldn't even rejoin the Union until we proved we had a Republican form of government based on local self-governance.